I gotta ask you guys a question. How is Errol the true Spence Jr.? How is he gonna beat Terence Crawford? I'm not saying that Terence Crawford is some invincible guy, right? But what I am saying is that Terence Crawford is a bad matchup for Errol Spence Jr.
I came to the gym like probably a month and a half after my accident, and I hit in the bag and my shoulders were hurting, tendons, hip, back, everything was hurting. I was like, man, I don't know if I can keep doing this. But, they assured me that, I could if I wanted to. It's just all about, basically my willpower, my mind.
And we're going to see November 19th when it goes down.
What's good, everybody? What's good? It's your boy, Cardinal, Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me. And we are back for another one. Alright, y'all, we got them new topics. How will Errol Spence Jr. beat Terence Bud Crawford? Alright, y'all, so let's get into it. How will Errol the Truth Spence Jr. take down Bud Crawford, the #1 pound-for-pound welterweight in boxing today? I mean, there's been a lot of talk. A lot of people have put their opinions out there.
Spence is definitely a formidable opponent. Early like Crawford, late. That's statistic wise, Crawford is good early, you gotta make adjustments. But Earl is a pressure cooker. If Earl can last and get to the rounds, he becomes a better fighter than he was in the early round.
And you gotta agree with some, you disagree with some, you formulate your own opinion. And I've come to the opinion a long time ago that size will make a difference in this fight. I know in boxing a lot of time, especially if you're a Manny Pacquiao fan. If you're a Manny Pacquiao fan, you know a lot of times in boxing, size doesn't matter. It's the dog in the fight. It's the skill sets of the fighter. How much do you bring to the ring? Because you can overwhelm an opponent. And I think a lot of Errol Spence Jr. fans and a lot of Terence Crawford fans feel like their fighter has an advantage. I think Bud Crawford fans feel like speed and experience. Terence Crawford has been undisputed already. He has unified at other weight classes. He's been in big fights, and he has more skill sets in boxing than Errol the Truth Spence Jr. And then you got Errol Spence. A lot of people feel like his size, he's had more welterweight experience. Now, Terence Crawford may have the overall boxing experience, but I think a lot of people feel like Errol Spence has more welterweight experience, and that his size and his power and his jab will carry him through the fight and to victory. Me personally, I think Errol Spence is going to get Terence Crawford in an awkward situation he's never been in. I think that because Bud doesn't have welterweight experience, I think once he gets deeper into the rounds and Errol Spence starts to land power shots, and Terence Crawford not being used to being hit with a lot of power shots from a welterweight in later rounds, and really not being hit at all and being tested at all, because he's been the victor of most of his fights, and they, even his own words, have been easy fights. He hasn't been drugged into the muddy water. He hasn't had to go a full fight and take welterweight power shots deep into a fight. So I think that's where Errol Spence's advantage lies, in Terence Crawford not having those late round welterweight experiences. Now, I do feel like Bud carries certain attributes into the fight that Errol Spence himself hasn't seen, and I think that he could add even more if he was to add angles and some of the hand-foot coordinating things that Manny Pacquiao used to do, because we all know speed kills in this sport. You can have as much power as you want to have, but if you can't catch your opponent, you can't hit your opponent. So speed is Terence Crawford's #1 key to victory. As far as Errol Spence goes, how does he beat Bud Crawford? I think it's going to come down to him winning early rounds, sustaining and landing power shots in the middle rounds, and ultimately getting Terence Crawford out of there in the later rounds with his stamina and his jab. I know a lot of people don't look at the jab as a power shot. But fighters in the past, like Ali, even Foreman, Lennox Lewis, they all used to use their jab as a power shot. It not only kept you at a distance, but landing that all night long is going to eventually have an effect. So for Errol Spence Jr., working everything off of his jab and not only just throwing it out there as a filler punch or a guide, but actually landing it with some authority is really going to carry him the victory. And I think that could ultimately overwhelm Terence Bud Crawford, because if he can't get inside and land his combinations with speed, angles, and then getting back to the outside away from Errol Spence's power, he's going to have a long night. And I think Errol Spence Jr. is just the type of fighter that loves to go at his own pace. He loves to go at his own pace. He works everything off of his jab. He has good power. When he gets to the inside, he has a little speed with his combinations and power. And this is how he overwhelmed Ugas and had him having to stop the fight. You know, these are all things Terence Crawford can't get caught up in. He can't get caught up in an early firefight with Errol Spence Jr. because I don't think he can naturally match the power. We know Errol Spence Jr. can take a welterweight punch. He's been at welterweight this whole time. So there's nothing as far as power that Terence Crawford can bring to the table that is going to surprise Errol Spence Jr. He has to use other things that he hasn't seen yet, like that Pacquiao footwork, those angles that Pacquiao used, the speed with the hand-foot-eye coordination. Those type of things, and that's not just a Pacquiao attribute. A lot of fighters have done that very well. It's something that Terence Crawford needs to bring to the table, new Errol Spence Jr. hasn't seen yet. And I think if he does that, he can go to victory. He can head straight to victory. He can win this fight. But I think if Errol Spence Jr. is able to work at his pace, land those shots when he wants to, throw small combinations when he catches Terence Crawford in compromising situations, and ultimately knock Terence Crawford the F out. Y'all hit that like button for me. Share, subscribe. Holler at me on all social media platforms. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, but you're more than likely to get a response on the tube, so holler at me over there if you want a response. It's your boy, Cardinal, Bud Crawford, or E.S. Red, if that's what you want to call me, and we are Manny.
I'ma keep it funky with these niggas.
And we're going to see November 19th when it goes down.